Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maria Waltzmeyer from the National Student Attendance, Engagement, and Success Center. Welcome to today's session, Early Warning Systems in Elementary Schools. Please allow me to share some brief details about the session. Today's presenter is Danette Hall. Danette is a facilitator from Johns Hopkins University's School of Education, working in Tulsa, Oklahoma with 3 elementary, 3 middle, and 2 high schools on using early warning systems and social emotional learning to improve student outcomes. Today's session will last for approximately 45 minutes, and it's been recorded. We would like to encourage everyone to utilize the chat function at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen to submit questions or comments for our presenter. Please be sure to select everyone from the drop-down box to ensure that your comments and questions are seen by me and our presenter. You may submit your questions throughout the presentation, and we will leave time at the end to address as many questions as possible. If we do not have time to get through all of the questions, we will reply to all participants by email within the next 5 to 7 days. All participants have been placed on mute to avoid background noise. Please do not unmute yourself. Instead, refer to the chat function on the right side of the screen if you have a question or comment. Following the Q&A portion of our session, there will be a brief pause. Your participation in this pause is extremely important to helping us better prepare our presentations and ensure that we are delivering content to you in a way that best suits your needs. We greatly appreciate your feedback to these questions. Before I hand the session over to Danette, I would like to remind folks of the upcoming webinars that will be held in November. More information and the link to register for this is included on the very last slide of this presentation. Also, I would like to share with you the mission of the National Student Attendance, Engagement, and Success Center. The mission of the center is to disseminate evidence-based practices and build and facilitate communities of practice to help students attend every day, be engaged in school, and succeed academically so that they graduate from high school prepared for college, career, and civic life. Danette?
Hi, everyone. I'm glad you all could join me today. I want to start by sharing the goals of this session. So the first goal is to make sure everyone understands the research and the process of EWS in elementary schools. We will examine the differences between elementary and secondary implementation, and I will ask you to share your intervention ideas, things that you have tried in your own school. Just a little background about me. 3 years ago, I was tasked with adapting secondary EWS into 3 elementary schools. So what I'm going to share with you today are lessons that I've learned along the way, successes we've had, and where we're headed next. So we're going to begin by looking at what key indicators we use in elementary school. These indicators of attendance, behavior, and course performance are signs that a student is either engaged, they're showing up, they're acting right, and they're doing the work, or they're checking out. It helps us target the right student with the right intervention at the right time. And statistically, disengaged students are more likely to drop out. We use the same indicators as secondary because that's what's available, and that's what has shown through research to predict dropouts. Attendance and behavior are main indicators in pre-K and kindergarten because there are no course performance grades given at those levels. And I'll share with you in a few minutes how we look at those grades in the upper grades. So the first thing we look at is attendance. Simply put, are they showing up? They are off track if they're missing 1 or more days. And they're off track if they're missing 1 day every 2 weeks. So that equals about 90% of the school year. They're on track if they're missing less than 1 day every 2 weeks. Our goal, of course, is to have them be college and career ready and on track. So we want them here 90% of the time or greater. For college and career ready, it's 95% or greater. And that still applies to the elementary schools as well. And it's funny how parents don't realize how quickly these add up. I've got a really good friend who received an attendance letter, and her thing to me was, well, she only missed a couple days a month, so it shouldn't have added up to be that much. But when she thought back and really looked at it, she realized that really did add up, and it really is a lot. So I want to share with you this study based out of Montgomery County in Maryland. In looking at the graduating class of 2012, 36.3% of the dropouts missed 3 or more days of school while they were in the first grade. 25.2% missed 3 or more days of school while they were in third grade, and 48% missed 3 or more days in sixth grade. So you can see how that attendance helped predict the dropouts even as early as first grade. The next indicator we look at is behavior. Okay, they are off track if they have 1 or more suspensions or they have mild sustained behavior. A lot of times in elementary schools, districts ask elementary teachers not to write referrals. For the major infractions, yes, but not for the everyday little sustained behaviors. So sometimes that data gets a little skewed. So for our purposes, we tend to stick to 1 or more suspensions. Of course, we want our kids to be on track, and that would mean no suspensions. A next suspension, it can be either in-house suspension or out-of-school suspension for the elementary school. So according to that same study out of Montgomery County, Maryland, 33% of dropouts had a behavior indicator in third grade. So again, behavior does indicate dropouts, even in third grade. So the third indicator and the fourth indicator that we look at is course performance, and this is specifically in English and math. Okay. So basically, are the students, do they know the material? Are they able to complete the work? If they cannot, then they're off track because they're earning an F. They're on track and college and career ready. If they are passing their courses, college and career ready would be a B or higher. For pre-K through second grade, it kind of varies, but letter grades aren't usually used. In this case, we look at what is used. For example, in my experience, students who receive a U for unsatisfactory in those grades, that would equal an F. If they have an N, which means needs improvement, that's about a D. If they have an S for satisfactory, that's about a C, maybe a low B. If they have an E for excellent, sometimes schools use A for advanced, that would be the same as making an A or a high B. Pre-K basically only has 2 indicators, and that would be attendance and behavior. The schools that I work with also use state testing and readiness testing to determine gaps in skills, and they work hard to fill those gaps. So here's that same study again out of Montgomery County, Maryland, and it shows 75.5% of students earning a D or below in third grade dropped out in high school. And that means they were failing either English or math. But 75.5% of the students that earned a D in third grade dropped out in high school. To me, that's very, very telling. The third grade reading test, I don't know how many states have it, but it does say that a student who can't read at a third grade level is 4 times less likely to graduate by the age of 19 than a child who does read proficiently by that time. So reading is very important and something that we need to keep monitoring and checking on. So again, this is that same study. The EWIs developed in this research identify as early as first and third grade nearly 8 out of 10 students who will eventually drop out of high school. And by 6th and 9th grade, nearly 9 out of 10 students who will eventually drop out. Because early warning indicators are signs of students disengaging from school, they provide schools with the opportunity to not only intervene with potential dropouts, but to also provide supports to students who are struggling with school that may or may not drop out. This accounts for roughly 5 out of 10 students who did not eventually drop out of high school. And this is based on Bob Belfonte's research. And research shows that 6th grade students with one or more indicators have only a 10 to 20% chance of graduating from high school on time or within 1 year of expected graduation. So let's look at these for a minute. Okay, the darkest line is math, and then it goes English, behavior, and attendance is that really light line back behind. So you can see that there's a steady decline between 6th grade and to 7th grade. Then there's a slight bump at 9th grade. Okay, kids are excited to be going to high school. They start the year. But then you can see between 9th and 10th, there's a huge downward spiral where those kids are dropping out. And then a few more in 10th grade, a few more in 11th grade, a little bump by 12th grade because they see hope, they see that light at the end of the tunnel, so they're there and they try to push through. But this shows how they fall off track. Most 6th graders only have one indicator, and they gained more as they got older. On the upside of this, there is good news. Students are resilient, and interventions can and do help students to get back on track. So what we do does matter. So wow, that's a lot of information. So what do we do with it all? We know early warning indicators work, so what do we do in the elementary schools? First thing we have to do is organize the data. And this will begin the process. There's often an overwhelming amount of data, so we need to make sure we can make sense of it and turn it into something useful. We need to single out the data that will support our work and format it in a way that is helpful to teachers. This data is formatted in a way that can be utilized. It highlights areas of successes and challenges. Let's look at what it tells us about John. So we can see in September 17-18, that's this current school year, he's already missed 5 days of school in the month of September. But last year, he was there 96% of the time. That's a huge red flag. And that's something when the data is laid out properly, you can see that red flag. If you look at Adrian, so far this year in the month of September, Adrian has been suspended, has received 4 referrals and been suspended 1 time. Last year, 2 referrals all year. There's another red flag. Okay, if you move over to course performance, if you look at Samuel, at the end of last quarter, he had a D in English Language Arts. So far this year, he's got a 55%, which is an F. Again, that's another red flag. With this data, we can look into the future to see the likely possibilities that are out there for our kids. And for a lot of them, it's dropping out. So we need to have a response to intervention system. Okay, so we start with a school-wide program, that is Tier 1. This is aimed at preventing 75% of the students from even getting an ABC indicator, an attendance, behavior, or course performance indicator. The things that we do for the whole school are extremely valuable, and we want to keep those kids on track. For Tier 2, it's targeted interventions. Okay, those are for the kids that don't respond to the Tier 1. We have to go a little bit further and work with small groups and help them get back on track. Tier 3, which is the red, that's your intensive efforts. That involves your specialists because a lot of times it goes beyond what the teachers can do in the classroom. So for those 5 to 10% of the students who don't respond to other supports, you get the counselors in there, you get wraparound services. You help them in different ways. And we'll look at those different tiers again. So what does it look like in early warning system? Ideally, everybody would be in green because all kids are on track, right? Well, we know this isn't true. We have those kids who are Tier 2 And we have those kids who are Tier 3. So we start with an effective Tier 1. Okay, again, Tier 1 is very important. These are what we are doing school-wide. This is high-quality teaching in every classroom. This is a positive school climate for teachers and the students. And it is creating the type of environment that you feel welcome at and positive about from the minute you walk into the school. It's those schools that you walk in and you can just, and kind of relax because you know you're in a good place. So some things to help make Tier 1 effective: you create an opening strong plan. What are we doing for the first 20 days to set the tone of the school? How are we going to implement things? Are we going to celebrate the students monthly or quarterly? Are we going to look back at our practices? How are we going to do that? How are we going to know we're being effective? We use data to identify students who move into Tiers 2 and Tier 3. Do we have common data that we can all look at? Do we review it regularly? Do we hold early warning indicator meetings? Do we monitor our interventions? So what I want to do real quick is I want you to type into the chat box, and please make sure that you have it on all participants, and share ways that you have engaged and supported the whole school in your ABC efforts. What do you do for Tier 1 for those students? And this is just a way to share ideas. So if you go into all participants and type into the chat, we'll see what we come up with. And while you're typing, I'll share a little bit more about the opening strong. At one school I was at, we had a whole program that we worked for the first 20 days. We had students come in and they signed a pledge to say that they would be there every single day for the first 20 days. We had celebrations. We had different giveaways that we had. And it wasn't just tangible things that, they could take with them. The teachers got involved and they came up with ideas to give a homework pass or to give them a replacement grade, so that they took a test and they didn't do well on it, they got a replacement grade. And those were based on what the teacher said they were willing to do. Other things we did is we gave popsicles to every student who was there that day. Doesn't matter if they missed the 5 days before, they were there that one day, they got popsicles at lunch. So those are just a few things you can do at Tier 1. And I didn't see anything come in the chat, so I'm just going to keep on going. If anything comes up, we'll bring it back up. They said caught you doing something good. That's a great example. So here's a sample resource map from Tier 1. This is a second grade team that came up with this. They use data folders. The kids track their own, in second grade, they track their own grades. They know what skills they've mastered, what skills they haven't mastered. And of course, this takes some work on the teacher's part at the beginning, but in the long run, it saves them time because the kids are learning how to make those graphs. Graphing is an important part of math. They learn how to look at it, how to find their skill gaps, and they also learn what they can do about it. They track their own attendance. How many days are they here that week? They figure out their own average daily attendance. They're very much aware of when they're missing, what happens when they miss. They have meetings with the teacher, one-on-one meetings. As we heard earlier from Delia, those relationships are so important, especially in the elementary school. You build that bond with those kids, and those kids will want to be there. They have a student handbook that they give out to all the students, and they go over it. They have school-wide attendance incentives. They have a weekly newsletter. They have a big buck system, so every time they're there in their classroom on time, they get a buck. And then they have a school store that they can go spend that buck in. Teaching finance to second graders. Fantastic. They also have the leader of the quarter. So that's like student of the week, only they have student of the quarter. So we need a system to prevent and respond to those students who aren't responding to Tier 1. So these are our Tier 2 and Tier 3 students. The way we respond to them is to hold EWI meetings. This is the process for finding and determining what interventions we need. Okay. There's also other intervention processes such as child study team, student support team. They call them different things to get a student into special education or to get them a 504 plan. And the EWI meetings, I believe we've talked about them in other sessions, but it's a way of focusing on the kids by looking at the data. Where do they have gaps? Where are they missing? What indicator are they showing? Do they have an attendance indicator? Do they have a behavior indicator? Do they have a course performance indicator? Do they have all indicators? And if so, where are we going to start to help this child be successful? And it works the same way in elementary. The end game is still preventing dropouts. So here's a sample resource map for Tier 2 and Tier 3. Okay, for Tier 2, parent interactions. One thing that's different, it seems to me, in my experience, for elementaries is those teachers see those parents every day. Those parents are walking their kids to the classroom and they're able to have those one-on-one conversations. Or the parents are pulling up in a car and they can go out and talk to the parents. They have very rich one-on-one conversations with the students. They don't do it in a whole setting. They don't pull the kids into the meetings. The kids get very upset when they are confronted by a large group of adults. It is very intimidating, and we don't want to put the students in that situation. So the teachers have a one-on-one conversation, and sometimes it's not always the teacher. Sometimes it can be the PE teacher. Sometimes at one of our schools, we had a fantastic librarian, and she would pull those kids in and talk to them one-on-one, and she had great success with that because they had built that relationship with her. We have, in one school, there was a Go Club that was looking at the kids who had poor attendance or chronic absenteeism and pulling them into kind of a competition to say, you know, what can we do to get here? Let's try to be here 3 days this week instead of 2. And building it slowly over time, so then they were there every day for 5 days, and then they were there every day for 10 days. It's taking those small wins and celebrating them with the students. Changing seats. If there's a group of kids who are being rowdy or talking or bullying or whatever is going on, change some of those seats around. The teachers have that power in their classroom to do that. For Tier 3, a lot of that becomes case management. For the parent conference, you can actually bring them in and they can sit down with the teacher, with the principal, with whoever needs to be at that meeting, and it makes it more formal than the parent interaction at Tier 2. And sometimes you get better results that way because they understand that more people than just that classroom teacher really care about that student and they really want to help them and be successful. Sometimes you send them to the social worker, the counselor. You provide wraparound services for them. Anything you can do at Tier 2 and Tier 3 to help them be successful. During that EWI meeting, we do follow the same process that we do in secondary schools. You look at the student, you look at the data, what brought them to this place, to the intervention team. What are we going to do? We have a champion. We come up with a goal for them, a SMART goal for them, something that they can definitely attain. We come up with how long are we going to do it, how often are we going to do it, and we have a good, solid intervention. But we still have the facilitator, the recorder, and the timekeeper, and our goal is still to help that student. One of the biggest differences is instead of having multiple teachers that know that student, you have one teacher that really knows that student very well. That's the classroom teacher because that's where they spend their day with that teacher. But you also have the same grade level teachers in that room because they have powerful insight into different things that they might be experiencing in their classroom, and they can share those and they can build on that knowledge. Or they might have had a similar experience with students that were misbehaving or students that didn't quite understand diphthongs or different situations that come up in elementary school. And that was kind of a mind shift for a lot of the teachers. They were like, why do we really need to be at these meetings? We don't teach this child, you know, we barely know their name only because the teacher says that they, you know, they don't understand this concept or they're struggling. And so we shifted their mind. It was really, really bringing in growth mindset so that they understood they do have value there as a team member. They can share their experiences. They can offer up interventions. They can help change what's happening in that classroom. And of course, with every EWI meeting, the goal is always student success. So when we're having these meetings, we also want to make sure we have intervention reviews. Okay, and we'll take a closer look at this in a minute. But trend data should always be reviewed to see if the school is moving toward the established goals. This means looking at the average daily attendance rate, the chronic absentee rate, the suspension and referral rate, and the course passage rate. By examining these, there are no surprises for the school, and they can determine the next steps. So during an intervention review, we examine which indicator is being looked at most frequently. Okay, so in this case, in this chart, attendance was looked at most frequently. And does this match the goal of the school? That's up to the individual school. In this particular school, their goal was to increase attendance, and it was also to reduce behaviors. So they did have a lot of it in there during this first quarter. And is it meeting the needs of the students? Okay, so you need to have a way to be able to measure the impact on the students. During the intervention review, you also look at the champions. This is important to determine who is doing the work. Okay, in the elementary schools that I've been in, the majority of the interventions are completed by someone in the school. This means a teacher, a counselor, someone who actually works in the school. And this makes very good sense for sustainability. In this chart, you can see that the teachers did about 39%, and then sometimes they would put all teachers, so there was a group of teachers that would work together, and that's why there's a difference there instead of just saying teachers. AP is assistant principal. CIS is communities and schools. So they had an outside agency, and CY is city year. So there was another outside agency that also came in. So you can see how that kind of broke down. The STF is a talent development, Johns Hopkins position. So they had different entities coming in and helping them. And then this is looking at the interventions and which ones were most frequently used. This can help a school examine their resources and how they're being utilized. It can also help a school determine the width and depth of the interventions. A school can determine if something is missing and what else might need to be added. Okay, so one of their favorite interventions was a personal conference. Okay, building that relationship with those kids, that is very crucial in keeping these kids in school. Another thing they did was a check-in. Every day the kids had to come in and check in with a specific person. And this helped them feel connected to the school. Other popular ones, calling home. A lot of times they put calling home, but what they actually did was talk to them, like I said, when the parents were dropping them off or when they were picking them up. So they were able to do that. And then out of all that, I find it very interesting that only 2% were actually referred to the child study team or the special education process. Because in my experience, a lot of their mindset had to change on that too, because they only originally wanted to look at the kids. They thought we need testing for special education. So this really brought it around so they could see that they're helping the whole school and not just that one particular small subgroup. When looking at both elementary and secondary, the indicators and the process remain the same. The biggest difference include teacher teams and interventions. In the elementary schools, especially in the lower grades, students typically have one main teacher that they are with all day. They go to specials or electives on a rotating basis for a minimum time period each week. This makes the main expert on that student the core teacher. In secondary schools, typically each teacher has the same amount of time with the student based on their class, so they are multiple experts on the students. So they go to one teacher for English, one teacher for math, one teacher for social studies, one teacher for electives. So you have multiple people who see that student. That's not usually the case in elementary. We did have one elementary that switched classes starting in 3rd grade. So they had an English and social studies teacher and a math and science teacher. So they were able to switch. So there you did get a little bit more diversity within the teachers. Teacher teams in elementary schools usually consist of grade level teachers. Specials teachers are also invited to the meetings, but most of the time they have the kids when those meetings are happening. When an agenda is sent out, the specials teachers or the elected teachers can have input through email or other documentation since they know which students will be discussed ahead of time. Because of the schedule of secondary schools, they're able to have more cross-curricular meetings either by cohort of students or by grade level. Elementary schools, in my experience, they have a much wider range of resources for their interventions. Some examples that I love that they used, they had a weighted blanket. So when you had calendar time or a time where they came and sat on the floor, the kids who were always fidgeting, they had a weighted blanket, multiple weighted blankets that they could give to the student, and the student put it on their lap. And it reminded them that they needed to, be focused on the teacher and not moving all over. Several of them came up with using a ball for a chair at their desk, and they love that. And it always amazed me that the other kids in the classroom didn't see that person as different or getting something special. They just saw it as, oh, that's what helps them learn the best. So they really set the environment up very well for these kids to be successful. Another thing that they did is they put red paper on certain students' desks because kids with ADHD, that helps draw their focus onto their work and it helps them stay focused with the red paper. So these are just a few things that they've used. And again, parents seem more accessible just because they're there, escorting their kids a lot more than they do in middle and high school. Other things that they've done, they have a walking school bus. So in our district, there's a mile walk zone. If they live within a mile of school, they don't offer a school bus. So they have a group of teachers from the school who offer to go and they walk the neighborhood before school, and any student who wants to walk to school with them, it's a safe way for them to get to school, and they're monitored and they get to school that way, and then they also walk them and drop them off back home. I'm kind of curious if anybody has any ideas that they want to share. What do you do in elementary school to provide interventions for your students? Go ahead and type it into the chat under all participants. I'm just curious about what you've tried. Or maybe you haven't started this and you're just thinking about it, so you might not have anything yet. Another thing they do is buddy teachers, and I've seen this in secondary as well. When a student is not able to focus in their own classroom for whatever reason, it could be they're distracted by another student. It could be, they're staring out the window because there's a great view and it's a sunny day and the teacher wants to help them focus. They can send them to another room, and they have this agreement ahead of time with the teacher. So the student can walk into that classroom and the student knows the process. Here's where you can go sit. Here's where you need to do your work and complete it and get it turned in. So that's just a few things that you can do, and the main differences between elementary and secondary implementation of the early warning system. Does anybody have any questions?
Today, this is Maria. I don't have any questions on the queue.
Okay. If anybody does have any questions at a later time, here's my email address. Feel free to contact me. I'll be happy to help you and work with you and answer your questions.
Let me just double check with Diane to see if she has received anything. Diane?
Okay.
I've been watching on this end too, and nothing came directly to me. Sorry.
Okay.
All right. So at this time, I think we're going to go ahead and move right into the polling.
Okay.
We would like to encourage everyone to participate in a few quick polling questions related to the session. Your responses are completely anonymous, so please answer honestly and help us find ways to improve our approach and content offerings in the future. We sincerely appreciate your feedback. what you're seeing right now, it's a reminder for the upcoming webinars that will be held in November and then 2 other ones in December. This is the information and the link to register. We thank you very much for attending today's session. I also want to thank Danette for her insight and expertise. We hope that the audience found this session helpful and informative, and we hope to see you again at a future National Center event. Thank you.